Shanghai International Circuit, Telemetry paints a revealing, almost ruthless picture. In the sprint qualifying session here, the numbers whispered what the eye could not completely see. Beneath the roar of engines and the blur of carbon fiber, a technical story unfolded, one of energy, patience and brutal efficiency, and at its center stood a single, recurring theme: the Mercedes power unit's uncanny ability to sustain thrust when it matters most. From the moment teams began to peel off into the pits, engineers were already reading a script written in volts and RPMs. Break a lap into its moving parts, the violent shove down the straights, the violent bite of braking, the delicate balance in the mid-corner, and the furious fight for traction out of the exit, and patterns appear. What telemetry from this weekend made brutally clear is that those patterns are not purely aerodynamic or chassis-driven. They are electrical as much as mechanical, a direct consequence of how modern power units distribute and recover energy under the 2026 regulations. The long run to turn 14 at the Shanghai Bowl is a crucible. It unmasks which cars can not only hit top speed, but keep pushing once the needle keeps climbing. The Mercedes factory effort and its customer machines threaded the needle perfectly, dominant not necessarily on the first surge off the corner, but terrifyingly effective in the second half of the straight, when most engines begin to level off. The result was gaps that looked modest on the speed trap but translated to near-second differences over the portions of the lap run above 240 km/h. That contrast was stark in the duel between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Telemetry showed the Maranello car hanging on, staunch and hungry, in the first phases of acceleration. It strode out of the corners with excellent traction and a turbocharger that seemed to bite early, giving the sensation of instant response. But as speed climbed past the 240 km/h mark, the Ferrari began to bleed time. The gap did not explode at the corner exit, it widened insidiously down the straight, a slow, cruel expansion that suggested a different philosophy in power and energy delivery. Why does that happen? The data hints at the mechanics, turbodynamics and electrical deployment. A turbocharger with lower rotational inertia spins up fast, rewarding snap and traction out of slow turns, the very trait praised in the Ferrari. But such a turbo may struggle to sustain peak pressure as speeds climb, the internal combustion engine stops rising, and without a sustained electrical surge, the car fades. Conversely, Mercedes' package appears built to hold the shove, a steady, long-duration discharge that keeps acceleration climbing when others begin to flatten. The picture sharpens when the two Mercedes-powered cars are compared. McLaren F1 team, sharing the same power unit architecture, offers a clean control case. On the straights, the difference between the factory car and the customer car is whisper quiet, a confirmation that much of the raw power and deployment strategy stems from the engine itself. Yet differences explode elsewhere. The factory car's chassis and aero package seem to mate better with the unit in mid-corner and traction phases, while the customer car loses just enough speed in long radius turns to show a slightly lower minimum pace. That contrast tells a second story: performance is a duet. The power unit sings strongest when the chassis knows how to translate its thrust into forward motion without spoiling balance. McLaren's mid-corner shortfall hints that identical hardware, when married to different aerodynamics and suspension maps, yields divergent lap time curves. Red Bull's car, meanwhile, offered its own drama. The telemetry showed the same pattern seen against the Ferrari and McLaren, a respectable defense in the first surge of acceleration, then a widening gap as the straight continued. But this weekend's context matters. After a power unit failure on Isaac Hadjar's machine in Australia, the team was likely nursing the unit, choosing conservative maps to preserve reliability. That prudence would shave top-end deployment and magnify the Mercedes advantage on long straights, a strategic trade-off that left the Dutch champion, Max Verstappen, fighting not only competitors but the invisible limit of permitted power. When the aggregate of these comparisons is laid bare, a trend emerges like a fingerprint. Cars equipped with the Mercedes unit, the factory car and its customers, are exceptional at the second phase surge, at holding power when others fall off. Alpine and McLaren suddenly sit higher on the speed graph than many had predicted, suggesting an update to energy management or a strategic shift in deployment. Where earlier in the season the factory team alone used an advanced energy management mode, Shanghai's data hints that the same clever distribution, reserving deployment for the latter half of the straight, has trickled down to customer outfits. The result is not merely about battery size, it is about choreography, when to release electrical energy so it complements the natural fall-off of the internal combustion unit. Consider the psychological dimension. A driver who sees a rival vanish not in the braking zone but down the middle of the straight experiences a creeping despair, the kind of pressure that forces mistakes, that influences setup choices and weekend strategy. Engineers, too, feel it. Telemetry becomes gospel, and the maps they choose become acts of faith. The ability to recover energy efficiently elsewhere on the lap magnifies this effect. More storage means more usable power when a sustained push is demanded. In Shanghai's unique theater, long runs, heavy acceleration, brutal transitions, these decisions become lap time currency. A car that times its electrical delivery well will not just flash past the speed trap, it will build an advantage that compounds turn after turn. That is the clearest lesson from this session. Modern F1 victories are being carved out not just by horsepower or aero, but by the artistry of energy management. As engineers pore over graphs and team principals rework strategies, one thought hangs in the cooling air. In 2026, the race is often decided by electrons as much as by explosive combustion. Mercedes' ability to sustain thrust at speed has unsettled rivals this weekend, but the story is far from finished. If the season so far is any guide, the next chapter will be written in deployment maps, recovery efficiency, and the silent wars of control software, a reminder that in F1 the loudest drama sometimes lives in the quietest lines of telemetry.